Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. EY has been called in to work with Rex Regional Express, with the airline pausing sales of flights between capital cities. Back in 2021, we spoke on this podcast to John Sharp, who is the deputy chair of Rex at the time. Rex had stepped up their operations from purely regional flights to having 737s flying the Golden Triangle of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and he accused Qantas of acting like a bully for retaliating by moving into Rex's regional routes. But there's been signs of trouble for weeks or months now at Rex, with major board moves, and then this week a trading halt for the airline. And then EY was called in. Neil Hansford is an international aviation consultant. He spent more than 40 years providing business plan assessments to airlines. We spoke to Neil exactly 3 months ago when Bonza was in trouble. Now it's Rex's turn. Neil, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be back.
What's going on? What's the story behind all this?
Well, there was a good fundamental business going back to the days of Kendall, operating in regional New South Wales primarily, then Queensland, then South Australia, then Victoria, and it was an essential service to rural Australia. And then somebody within the Rex organisation decided that we're flying all these people into hubs and we can take these people on the Golden Triangle of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. And that decision, great enthusiasm, but it hasn't been delivered. So somebody coming from Tamworth, coming down into New South Wales, they assumed if they're going to Melbourne, they would potentially stay on Rex. And it hasn't happened.
Why is that?
I think everybody underestimates the power of the Qantas frequent flyer, and to a lesser degree Virgin. It's a very, very strong tool. Doesn't matter whether you talk about British Airways Executive Club or whatever. It is a market distortant, and people, particularly if they're using somebody else's money to buy their miles, they will find that they will use routes and times, and if somebody else's money, often higher fares, to accumulate their miles and their status credits. And I think our friends at Rex, and let's face it, it's not an Australian company. It's a primarily Singaporean and Asian-owned company now with a small Australian shareholding. They don't quite understand the dynamics of the Australian consumer of air services.
So do you think if they had stuck to their regional routes, they may have succeeded? And, we're talking this morning, we don't know exactly what the outcome of this is going to be, but it's fairly clear it's in trouble. Do you think it would have done better had it started in its regional routes?
Yes, it would have done better, but they still had a looming problem. The fleet of Saab 340s is greater than 30 years old. So in this day and age, where Qantas and to a degree Virgin have got new fleets, to be operating a 30-year-old fleet with all of the engineering costs and the shortage of spares, despite them monopolising that market, there was decisions should have been taken a decade ago to start upgrading the fleet to either ATR or Dash, and those decisions have never been taken because our Singaporean friends in particular have been more in about taking money out of Rex rather than investing long-term with major commitments. If you took it over tomorrow and kept the same fleet, you would need to be committing to $2 billion worth of airframes, which if it did come to the market, would be very hard to finance.
Okay, now the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese yesterday told the ABC that Rex already received subsidies. He basically said there was no strings attached to them. Do you think the government needs to step in? It doesn't sound like it wants to.
I don't think neither it should. Look, one of the arts that Rex has had, while ever it's had John Sharp, a former Nationals Transport Minister, they've been very good at whinging and complaining about Qantas, about the airports. They are confrontational in style. They've had confrontations running with airports, governments. And if you run the confrontational style, it all comes around the corner to bite you. And in the end, this is not a Qantas-induced problem. This is all induced within Rex. There's no baddie outside. They've made all their own mistakes.
Okay, but is Qantas too big a gorilla in our aviation sector, particularly when you look at what's happened previously? Bonza, obviously, we spoke to you about Bonza earlier on, but you can even go back, years before that. Ansett, Virgin, indeed. Is it a market issue? Is Qantas too big? What do you reckon?
It's not. And I think one of the problems is nobody wants to face the high costs of labour in the Australian aviation industry. We want Rolls-Royce services equal with the best in the world. We want to pay mini prices. We don't have low-cost airlines. We have low-fares airlines. And the cost of the aviation environment here, with all of the venture capitalists owning so much of the airports, it is a high-cost environment and very difficult to make money in. And the fact that Qantas has been able to recover is an indication of their management rather than the poor management of others. Let's face it, Bain and Company have still not been able to get the float of Virgin away because the market circumstances haven't been satisfactory. And I don't think they'll become satisfactory for some time. And that's why people like Qatar are taking a slab of Virgin, and there may be other airlines who will come into it in the same way that Etihad did, but somebody else will come into Virgin rather than not relying on a float.
Stay with me, Neil. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to international aviation consultant Neil Hansford. So you talk about it being high cost in Australia. Is that because of airport costs or is it labour costs? Why is it high cost here?
Labour. It is clearly labour. As long as I've been in the industry, it's labour, it's manning practices. A lot of the practices in the aviation sector have come from the wharves, and it goes back to when the wharves pre-containerisation, guaranteed gang levels, guaranteed manning levels, guaranteed sick leave, the employees rostering their own sick leave to make sure that the overtime is attained. The problem has never been the paid wage, it's what we call the grey conditions, and it's still as inherent in the industry as it ever was.
So what happens to Rex, do you think? Can it make it?
The problem is if you try to sell Rex, somebody's got to be prepared to, with very deep pockets, to refinance a fleet of modern turboprops, and maybe it would have to be a downsized regional operation, and it can be saved, but it's going to be not by pimply-faced smart-ass merchant bankers. It will be by aviation professionals who clearly understand the market. They understand the dynamics of our regionals, our servicing of Indigenous communities. They really have to know the business, and there's no textbook on understanding the Australian intrastate market, and for certain they would have to stay out of trying to be the smallest player on the Golden Triangle. You're not going to be attractive if you do 6 flights a day as against Qantas providing 54 and Virgin with similar numbers. So it's not a market for small players, as attractive as it looks as being the second biggest city pairs in the world.
So Qantas or Virgin likely to be attracted to the rump of Rex? And I'm not saying the whole lot. I'm deliberately saying the rump of Rex.
I don't think Qantas would want to. Look, they've provided enough of the regional feed. Qantas only keep their QantasLink operations because of its feed to their interstate and their international services and this historic commitment to rural Australia. But I don't think it certainly wants to take a big scoop of more regional routes, and a lot of the public service routes and other things that Rex have taken from other governments. So a lot of the things that they're taking on should best have been done by small 5 and 6 aircraft operators, not with the overheads of a very big carrier.
Which ultimately means that regionals could lose out at the end of the day in all this.
Yeah, what the government will have a responsibility for is providing service to some of the monopoly routes that have been granted by licensing. If the route's worth having, I think Qantas or Virgin is there. So it's a bit like Bonza. Go and try and make a market out of something that isn't there without government support.
Yeah, very difficult. Neil, not only has this been entertaining, it's the only time this podcast has ever heard the phrase smart-ass, pimple-faced merchant bankers. That in itself is fantastic. Thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed.
And the difference is I agree with it, but the other thing is that I liken Rex, what they've done is you go down to the beach and pick the biggest fella laying on the beach and kick sand in his face and wonder why you end up getting pummeled.
Yeah, Rex v Qantas is what you're talking about.
It doesn't have to be Qantas, but they took Virgin on and got a bloody nose.
Thanks for talking to us this morning.
Always a pleasure to talk to people who understand the business.
That was international aviation consultant Neil Hansford. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.